Images first reality, but they show the reality that disrupt the hegemonic field of representation itself. Images point somewhere else beyond themselves to a life of precarious. They cannot show us from the apprehension of precariousness like that we destroy, that many U.S. citizens can develop an important and vital consensus against the war. But if we continue to discount the words that deliver the message to us, and the media will not run those pictures in life, remain unnameable and ungrievable. And if they do not appear in the precariousness and their destruction, we will not be moved. We will not return to a sense of ethical outrage that is distinctively foreign, other in the name of other. We cannot, under contemporary conditions of representation, hear the agonized cry or be compelled or commanded by the face. This is the fact of the face that we are nevertheless asked to kill, subverting the world as face rather than consummate our own humanity. Cultural criticism has a task at first moment is there not to return to the human, where we do not expect to find the frailty and limits of capacity makes sense. We'd have to interrogate the emergency and vanishing of the human elements of what we can know, what we can hear, what we can see, what we can sense. This might prompt us to reinvigorate the intellectual project of critique, of questioning, coming to understand the difficulties, demands of culture, translation, descent, to create a sense of public in which opposite social voices are not feared, discredited, or dismissed, but valued for the instigation to a sensate democracy they occasionally perform. We therefore advocate an obituary for the United States Supreme Court decision ex parte hearing. This act is an affirmation of those who have been made by the large application of the legal distinction. This decision upholds this affirmation is essential to opening space for us to grieve the person who lost his tragedy, violence, aggression, advance, and naming the war on terror. This is a specific tragedy of criticism which should not be excluded to restrain our affirmed by placing arbitrary limits on the game debate. Is an extension of the conservative strategy which deems what is and is not sayable or control the public's sphere of debate. Once it's been decided that our what I see is treasonous, you can't be seen or heard, and neither can the atrocities we've outlined. They all become invisible. You should reject this strategy of calling dissent because it is too easily incorporated into larger strategies of derealization of life. Butler 2K4. Dissent debate dependent on the inclusion of those who maintain critical views, state policy, and civic culture, making a large part of discussion in politics and policy. Charge those who voice critical views with treason to seek to destroy the credibility not only of the views who will held, but of the persons who hold them. It produces a climate of fear which voices certain views to risk being brandishing with heinous appellation. Dissent is quelled through threatening speaking subject to uninhabitable identification, because it would be heinous to identify as treasonous as a collaborative one fails to speak, or one speaks in throttle ways in order to sidestep the terrorizing identification to take hold. The strategy for quelling dissent, limiting the reach of critical debate happens not only through a series of shaming tactics, but as well by producing what will and will not count a viable speaking subject in the reasonable opinion within the public domain. Is precisely because one does not want to lose one's status of viable speaking being, one does not say what one thinks under social conditions that relegate identification and sense of viability. This degree censorship operates implicitly and forcibly. The line is circumscribed what is speakable and what is little also functions as the instrument of censorship. Decide what views will count as reasonable within the public domain is to decide what will count as the public sphere of debate. Foreclosure of critique empties the public domain and debate and democratic contestation itself, so that debate becomes exchange among the views of the like-minded, and criticism, which ought to be central to any democracy, becomes fugitive and suspect activity. Public policy often seeks to restrain public sphere by being open to certain forms of debate. One way a hegemonic understanding of politics achieved through circumscribing what will and will not be admissible to the public sphere itself. To produce what constitutes the public sphere, it is necessary to control in the way in which what people see, how they hear, what they see. These constraints are not only in content. Certain images of dead bodies in Iraq, for example, are considered unacceptable for public visual consumption. What can be heard, felt, seen, and know. That regulation of the sphere of appearance is one way to establish what will count as reality and what will not. Is also a way of establishing what lives to be marked lives and whose deaths will count as death. Our capacity to feel and apprehend hangs in balance, but so too does the fate of certain lives and deaths, as well the ability to think critically and publicly about the effects of war. Finally, providing an obituary for ex parte hearing establishes a politics of grief which refuse to foreclose our vulnerability, violence, and this open space for identification with suffering. Voting affirmative is essential to creating a relationship with the other that is not based on violence or the urge to exterminate. Butler 2K4. Is there something to be gained from grieving, from tearing free, from being exposed to its unbearability, not endeavoring to seek a resolution of grief through violence, or return to sense of human vulnerability, or collective responsibility for the physical lives of another? To foreclose vulnerability vanishes, make itself secure at the expense of every other human consideration, is to eradicate one of the most important resources for which we might take our bearings and find a way to grieve, or make grief itself a resource for politics, not to be designed in action, but is to be understood as a slow process by which we develop a point of identification with suffering itself. The disorientation of grief posits the eye and the mode of unknowing. This can be a point of departure for new understandings of narcissistic preapplication with melancholy. It can be moved to consideration of vulnerability else. Then we might critically evaluate and impose conditions on which certain human lives are more vulnerable than others, and thus certain human lives are more grievable than others. For one meta principle emerged by which we ought to protect others from the kinds of violence we have suffered, not from an apprehension of common human vulnerability. I do not mean to presume combination of human, although speak its name is already defined its possibility. We are vulnerable to violence, but we are also vulnerable to a range of touch. Range that includes our eradication of being at one end and our physical support of our lives at the other. We cannot recover the source of vulnerability. Permits the formation of the I. This condition is the condition of being laid bare from the start, which you cannot argue. I mean, we can argue that we are perhaps foolish. It's not dangerous when we do. It would be difficult, not impossible, and even suffer from oppression without seeing how the primary condition exploitable and exploited, denied lives supported and maintained differently in radically different ways. Human physical vulnerabilities distributed across the globe. I got to the last mark on the page.
Okay. Do you advocate the Supreme Court should take action to overrule one of the four decisions in the resolution?
No.
Okay.
Or we don't defend court action.
Okay. How do you access this type of broad-scale public evidence about how images of violence were shown on TV during the Vietnam War and that changed the public consciousness? How are you able to access this type of broad-scale argument about a consciousness shift throughout society?
Our argument is with an ethical orientation to establish grief. It's a question of what we have to do as individuals. Whether or not we create a broad-scale transition is largely irrelevant.
So what does that mean as individuals? How should we respond to acts of violence committed against America in the world of the ethical framework?
How should we respond to acts of violence committed against who?
Against Americans in the world of the ethical framework in the 180s.
Our argument is that we should grieve those lives as well.
So
establish a relationship with those people.
So when terrorists run planes into buildings, we should just grieve for those lives.
Yeah. Acts of violence.
Okay, this is the question, and we contend this. Would that preclude responding to those acts of violence then?
It depends on what you mean by responding. If you
Should
mean violent,
kill the people